Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network's BRN Sunday podcast, where members of the media, academia, financial services, and many others analyze all the news in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, and so much more. I'm Jeff Snyder, your host. So glad you could join us this morning. We have an amazing show and we have an amazing guest, Michelle Beach, who is an English teacher with the Hebrew Academy of the Five Towns and Rockaway, is going to be joining us. We're going to talk about distance learning. And of course, we have all of our great contributors. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday Podcast. Well, let's kick things off with a look at the latest social media trends, or as we call it, This Week in Finance. And joining me on the line, Devin Banerjee. He's a senior financial services editor for LinkedIn and is also the editor of the This Week in Finance newsletter, which you can find on the LinkedIn platform under Devin's name. Devin, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Always good to be with you, Jeff.
Yeah, I almost forgot what time of day it was, but we're technically recording this in the afternoon my time, morning your time, and releasing it morning Eastern time on Sunday. So I don't know, wherever. Devin, lots going on, I'm sure, on the platform. I follow the coronavirus information on the website, on the LinkedIn platform, as well as all the other key trends that are going on. But what's top of mind for you and your team this week?
Yeah, extremely busy week on the platform, Jeff. A lot of trending stories. So I'm gonna plow through several this time. The first actually is related to some data that we at LinkedIn have started putting together and are releasing every 2 weeks. It's called our LinkedIn Workforce Confidence Index, basically a pulse of how the workforce is feeling in the U.S. and around the world. So this week we released our inaugural index in the U.S. and just a couple of things I want to point out. We find that people's confidence in their own industries, their own employers, and their own careers is varying widely by industry and other factors. So in terms of industry, we're seeing among the confidence leaders, people working in public administration, people working in manufacturing, which was really interesting, people working in the finance sector and in the software and IT sectors. In terms of the lower confidence industries, we're seeing, of course, transportation, real estate, consumer goods, travel, design, entertainment, and media and communications, unfortunately. So some really interesting data there. You can see it on my colleague George Anders' profile, Anders. He's released the full results. A couple other things that stood out to me in our inaugural index. Freelancers are unfortunately having a very, very tough time. We saw their confidence shaken just as much as the unemployed, actually. Not much of a statistical difference between freelancers and the unemployed right now. Millennials, interestingly, were the most confident age group, the most confident generation there in terms of their careers. They may be in that sweet spot, we think, that, defined by having enough work experience to have some job security, but also being quote unquote young enough to think they can, recover from this financially and professionally for the rest of their careers. A divergence between seniority in organizations. So we actually saw senior leaders a bit less confident, a bit more pessimistic than rank and file employees. And we think that may be just because the senior leaders are closer to the numbers, the P&L, closer to the data of what's going on in their companies and their industries. Some interesting personal finance related results from our inaugural index. Some not surprising. A majority of Americans have seen their retirement account balances fall. Of course, not surprising given what the markets have done. A majority, 54%, has cut back on personal spending, they say. But even cutting back on spending, a third of Americans have made a dent in their personal savings during this crisis over the past month. So that was quite interesting as well. I'll stop there, but definitely encourage people to check out the index. We'll be doing it every 2 weeks and keeping a finger on the pulse of how people are faring during this unprecedented time.
Devin, I was going to ask you about the frequency. Thanks for doing that. How do you gather this information? Is it survey based, or is it based on some other
Yeah.
algorithm that you're using? Just out of curiosity.
Absolutely, yeah. The methodology is all on George's profile. It is a survey based. We had our respondents this time. The count was, I think, about 5,200.
Wow.
And we have an insights team here at LinkedIn that ensures it's statistically robust. It is diversified by respondents in terms of geographies, ages, seniorities, etc. But all of the N count on all of the different questions is included in the methodology. So yeah, we're doing our best to keep it as statistically robust as possible.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a long list of this is an item in a long list of items that you all are doing in terms of analyzing the data that you have on the platform. So this is just another flavor of that,
yeah.
Which is good.
Yeah, absolutely. And another flavor, which was more anecdotal this week, but a lot of attention on an interview we did with Max Levchin. He is the founder and CEO of the lender Affirm. So we talked with him using Affirm as kind of a lens into consumer sentiment, consumer spending right now. So a couple of takeaways from that interview I did with Max this week, who's also, by the way, the co-founder of PayPal back in the day. So he said, of course, some things are obvious. No one is flying. No one's going to concerts. No one's buying tickets for anything. They finance a lot of those purchases. But he's seeing a lot of people investing in their homes and investing in themselves. So home workout equipment, purchases of those up about 300% through the Affirm platform. Kitchen equipment now is making a big upsurge, about 160% recent growth there that they're seeing in kitchen equipment. He says he's seeing hobbies make a comeback. One interesting anecdote there is the purchasing of aftermarket auto parts and auto equipment is surging through Affirm. He's saying a lot of people are confined to their homes, and one way to stay in the home but enjoy yourself is to work on your hobbies, like aftermarket auto repairs and improvements. Another interesting takeaway there from the Max Levchin interview that people are picking up on is the topic of layoffs. A lot of businesses are facing this possibility or going through it or have already gone through it. So I'd encourage people to kind of take a read at what Max says about layoffs when they're necessary and when it's important and unfortunate, but also important based on your duties to investors, shareholders, and also to employees who remain at the company even after a wave of layoffs. You have a duty to them as well. And related to that, I'll just mention, Jeff, there was a CEO, Henry Ward. He runs a company called Carta. It's an investor and shareholder management software who had to announce a round of layoffs this week. And he posted the full script of his remarks to his team. And a lot of people are reading that over and over and just kind of marveling at the transparency, walking employees through exactly how things were decided, exactly what the numbers were, putting all the responsibility on himself, saying he signed off on everything, not your manager, not your colleagues. So, just of course, people are put in this unfortunate situation of having to make these decisions regarding layoffs. And so there are some best practices out there that we're starting to see on social media.
Yeah, transparency is important. And, just if you're laid off, you could be rehired. So I think it's best for both sides to continue to have those conversations and be fully aware. Devin, going back to I found it really interesting. Hobbies are making a comeback. That's amazing. I've also seen where computer accessories are really and software accessories, things like that, are really being highly sought after now because people are working remotely from home. So you've seen people buy more cabling, additional monitors, and things like that to be able to telecommute.
That's right, and we're starting to see that reflected in what companies are sharing in terms of their numbers, its earnings time. So a lot of the software companies, of course, communication softwares like Zoom and video conferencing, but also chat softwares like Slack, Microsoft, and its Teams product, which I should say is the parent company of LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. So the earnings season will be interesting. We'll get some visibility into what people are purchasing, and that's probably why we see the tech indices and the stock market really kind of being resilient and outperforming in many ways. One more topic, if I could squeeze it in. Also outperforming recently are sustainable funds. Actually, we featured a study out from Morningstar showing that the returns of 70% of sustainable equity funds ranked in their top halves in recent weeks. 44% were in their category's top quartile. And these numbers are way up from previous time periods. And Morningstar is pointing to a lot of these funds' lower exposure to the energy sector, for example, as oil prices have really cratered in the past month. But it's kind of just brought that conversation back to the fore about sustainability, about ESG, and also just about how companies are operating. It's brought back the conversation about governance, shareholder primacy, and multi-stakeholder capitalism. These are all. It sounds all like jargon, but it's all the concept of companies catering and thinking about not just their shareholders, but their employees, their customers, their investors. And we're seeing people, even big investor types like Paul Tudor Jones, who has started a research organization called Just Capital to create indices of companies that are embracing multi-stakeholder governance. So we're seeing a lot of them talk about how this crisis has exposed real deep inequalities in society, wealth inequalities, and others. We're seeing insecure jobs, lack of, sick leave, difficulties accessing unemployment, homelessness, lack of insurance. All that stuff has really just been exacerbated, and also a light has really been shown on those issues during this crisis. So I think that conversation about governance, ESG, stakeholder capitalism will really continue, fortunately, throughout this crisis and afterward.
It's interesting you bring that up. I spoke earlier at the top of the week with Mona Naqvi. She is the head of the ESG product strategy for S&P Dow Jones Indices, and she had mentioned, based on the tracking that they do, that sustainable funds had done exceedingly well in the first quarter. And immediately what popped in my head is exactly what you said, which is that's great news for all the reasons you mentioned, but also the energy costs. Energy took a huge hit this quarter, and it looks like it's going to take it. Gas prices are dropped well under $2, and in some places under $1, which I remember when I started driving in 1988. So that's a long time ago. So not a good thing. But back to your earlier point about the resiliency of the technology industry, and we covered today, as we're recording this on a Friday, we had a story about how fintechs are stepping up to help with the sending of stimulus information or stimulus checks and funding around the people. So nice to see everybody in the economy step up. And I guess we'll kind of see how we're all playing it day to day, right, Devin? We're all trying to figure out hour to hour, minute to minute.
That's absolutely right. But kind of looking through to the end of this crisis, whenever that is, it's just fascinating that so many trends that we've been talking about the past couple of years are just being accelerated. So all those things we just mentioned. Also, we have a story about virtual health, really coming to the fore and permanently probably after this crisis, really taking a larger role of importance in the healthcare system. So again, all these interesting trends that we've been talking about just being accelerated right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Devin, always a pleasure talking with you. For those who are interested, and you should be, you can check out Devin's and the team's This Week in Finance newsletter on the LinkedIn platform. Just look for Devin. He's got lots of friends, but he's always looking for more. Devin, always great to talk with you. Take care, stay safe, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks, Jeff. Take care.
Bye-bye. Welcome back. We're going to talk about technology. A lot going on in the technology space. And joining me on the line, Daniel Klein, Senior Technology and Consumer Products Reporter with The Motley Fool. Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm better than most, so I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, well, I think we're all very fortunate. It's difficult, obviously challenges, logistical challenges, but we're all very fortunate just to be healthy. If you don't have your health, Dan, you got nothing.
I'm lucky to be healthy. I'm lucky that my brother had it, got over it, and is now doing great. So, never that scary. Was monitoring with a doctor via teledoc and taking his temperature and sort of knew what his symptoms were. In New York at the time. Now he's recovered and hanging out in Miami on a rooftop deck. So life is good.
Good for you. And I just want to point out before we kind of jump into new Apple iPhone and other things. I want to give you kudos and Motley Fool kudos because in addition to writing all these stories that you're writing and you're doing an amazing job personally and your team's doing a great job professionally. You are also doing live streaming at the Motley Fool for your paid users. Is that correct? So you are
Yeah,
appearing 2 hours a day. Is that right?
sometimes more. So our CEO Tom Gardner, who's a brilliant man, just kind of wanted to put people at ease and give members. Obviously, the stock market's been very volatile. So we, in the middle of this, with no planning and no access to our production studios, launched a 12 to 14 hour a day, eventually 24-hour a day live stream. And right now, some of them are planned shows. Maybe we'll spend an hour looking into, say, Disney stock or Zoom stock. Some of them we're just taking questions. And spun it up very quickly. Production values are relatively low at the moment, but thousands and thousands of people. And it's been an amazing thing for me because, you're getting comments from users. I was worried about this. You guys made me feel better. I found out how to do this. Now I understand that stock markets go down quick, but they come up slow. So, anyone out there who's scared, look for sources that aren't playing this for ratings. Look for people that are telling you, okay, didn't get my stimulus check, here's where you look.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff with a clear voice, and I am very privileged to get to do that with many of my wonderful colleagues. It's also a great way to get to spend time with my friends. So
Yeah, well, good for you, and kudos to you and the network, or excuse me, the company, I guess, and glad that you guys were able to do that. So let's jump right in. I mean, let's talk a little tech. We talked on the network this week about Zoom and how that can help with loneliness, but it looks like Apple has come forth with with a new phone. So what can you tell us there?
So it seems a little odd for any company to release a new product, but Apple had a new version of its iPhone SE in the works before this, and they've released it's a smaller phone. It does not have the facial recognition. It goes back to the finger sensor and the thumbprint, but it is a $399 phone. I will tell you, and I'm holding it up, but of course we're only on audio here. I paid, I don't know, $1,200, something like that, for the latest iPhone, whatever it is. So coming out with a $400 model makes a lot of sense for families. It makes a lot of sense for people who are budget constrained, because if your phone breaks, you still need a phone. And this is good for Apple. It gives them something. Traditionally, their answer to people who wanted a cheaper phone was buy an older phone. And the problem is, if you buy an iPhone 6 or wherever you'd have to go to get down to that $399 price, you're buying something that's going to be obsolete sooner rather than later. By buying a new model, you're going to get a few years out of it. So I think it's a very smart place for Apple to be.
Yeah, and look, I mean, look, I am not buying enough. I know that you buy phones because you are a technology person who writes on these things, right? So it's important for you to have the latest. For someone like me, I had the iPhone 10. These iterative changes don't make a lot of sense. And I don't think paying $1,200 is doable for a lot of people, especially given what's going on. But having this more cheaper version that does a lot, it allows you to stay connected, especially during these difficult times, is makes a lot of sense to me, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, and look, and $400 is still a high price point for a lot of people. You can buy an Android phone for under $200. That's going to do a lot of what you need to do. But I would argue that the learning curve is a little bit higher. So, if you're a little bit older, you're not a tech person, an iPhone has a pretty low barrier to entry. It's really easy to download apps and to do stuff. So this makes that more accessible to more people. And a year from now, when that model's a year old, you could probably pick one up for, $250. It brings Apple even further down. This is something Apple doesn't normally do that makes a lot of sense in this market.
What does it mean in terms of competing with some of the other phone companies, the Samsungs, the HTCs? I hope I'm getting these names right. Does it help them in the competition to kind of gather that lower end of the market?
It does, because I think if you like your iPhone SE, you're more likely to, when it's time to upgrade, or when your carrier offers a really good deal, to get the latest and greatest. If you sort of had a little sampler of how cool the product is and didn't know how, look, I don't like Android phones. I'm pretty clear on that. I liked Windows.
Really, Dan? Tell us how you feel.
Yeah, I liked Windows Phone back when that was a thing. I enjoyed the interface. I worked at Microsoft at the time, so I had one. But I think Samsung, HTC, a lot of the players had phones that catered to all price points. Apple's never done that. They don't have a $39 TV dongle. They don't have a $99 iPad. They've always been really careful of staying away from that and keeping a premium on their product. This is still a premium price for a lot of people, but it's also a premium value, and that lets Apple, if you're considering a $299 lower end Samsung phone or an iPhone, there's a lot of arguments to be made to spend that extra $100 for an iPhone.
Dan, last question for this part of the segment. My understanding is that these devices are made in China, right? Is there any delay potentially by what has happened in China? I know there's some level of recovery, but would there be potential production issues related to SE? Or are they moving those?
So they haven't said anything.
Okay.
This was kind of a surprise announcement. It was a rumored announcement. So I think we are early in the life cycle, and it wouldn't shock me. I mean, Apple, when they put a new phone for sale, it's never a 48-hour delivery. Sometimes if from the order date, it's a week. Sometimes they tell you it's 2 weeks, but it shows up in a week and a half. So I would assume that it's sort of the normal Apple production lifestyle, unless something about the current situation has changed demand. Maybe there's an awful lot of people that want this phone. Maybe T-Mobile comes out and says, you know what, commit for another year and we'll give you one. Now that's not how T-Mobile works, so they probably won't do that. But you'll see some deals. You'll see some companies signing on. But for now, I think not a lot of people that don't need a phone are buying a phone. I don't expect this to be a buying frenzy situation.
Yeah, interesting. So let's shift gears. I know you want to talk about price gouging and maybe some Amazon worker safety. Excuse me. Go ahead and take it.
Yeah, so I think Amazon has gotten a lot of negative publicity because obviously they've had to stay open. When they first stayed open, they didn't have the level of social distancing and masks and protective equipment that they have now. And in that area, I'm going to give them a little bit of a pass. I'm sorry about the angry email you're going to get for this, Jeff, but
thanks.
I think no company had a blueprint for this. I mean, we were very lucky.
Call Dan.
Yeah, I'm easy enough to find on Twitter if you want to complain. So
sorry, go ahead.
It's one of those things where we're really lucky. What we do is remote. Motley Fool has always encouraged remote workforce and the ability to work from home. So shutting our office wasn't a big deal. You can't load packages remotely. So Amazon acted quickly. They're enacting things like temperature checks. And from the beginning, they've been talking about their efforts to stop price gouging. When you sell on the third-party marketplace in Amazon, you set your own prices. And when you do that, for essential goods, there are laws, they vary state by state, about price gouging. So, for example, when I ran a toy store, if we had the last Lego Star Destroyer in existence that was unopened, we could put it up at a collectible price. Nobody needs a Lego Star Destroyer. If we had the last box of rice that's for sale, we cannot put up rice for $1,000 a bag. There are definitely people on Amazon in the third-party marketplace that have been price gouging on toilet paper, selling hand sanitizer that is in no way the type of hand sanitizer you need to deal with coronavirus. And Amazon has been taking down listings as fast as they can. They're policing it. They've turned over 6,000 names to various state attorney generals. So I'm going to give Amazon, again, a lot of credit for dealing with this pretty aggressively. It's not easy to determine, if a $50 package of toilet paper is a good value because you're getting, 600 rolls, or it's somebody selling a regular package of Charmin with 6 rolls for $50.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, I think kudos. I agree. Kudos to Amazon for trying to do this. And, I think I do recall seeing at a recent press conference the Attorney General saying, look, if you price gouge and do these things, and I just can't fathom that mindset, by the way, Dan. I mean, we're all going through this together. It's not like there's one, in a hurricane type situation or a natural disaster, it's usually very regionalized. But everyone in this country is dealing with that, including the people that are selling goods. So why would you try to make a profit, a substantial profit? I'm fine with making a profit, but trying to, do it a tenfold or 100-fold, that just seems downright nasty.
Yeah, and look, when you're buying anything, do your homework. There's been a lot of complaint online, oh my God, my grocery store is price gouging me. Eggs, the price of eggs doubled in a month. Well, the wholesale price of eggs doubled in a month. So that is not your grocery store gouging you. That is your grocery store using the exact same pricing model it used before.
Mm-hmm.
It just has a higher cost.
Yep.
So there are some things when you order from Instacart, you are going to pay a premium for everything you buy. I'm going to say 5 to 10%. They don't divulge those numbers. I've never gone to a store and comparatively price shopped. Certainly, if you use Instacart for liquor, which I may have done in apocalyptic quantities, you're going to pay a little bit more. And look, that's a convenience. We need that right now. So I would say go with, recognize that businesses have higher costs. They need to pay their workers. If you're keeping people 6 feet apart, limiting how many people can be in your store, delivering, those are costs. So recognize that 10, 15, even 20% more might not be price gouging. And if at all possible, tip whatever you can. If somebody is coming out to your house, putting themselves at risk, 15%, 25%, whatever you can do, and say thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, a lot of us taking advantage of Instacart and Fresh Direct and Uber Eats and Grubhub, and it's important to buy local. It's important to give back. Dan, last thing I want to talk about, we've got about 2.5 minutes left in this segment, but I want to talk to you about Amazon worker safety. There's been a lot of write-up about this, and you mentioned this at the beginning of beginning of this part of the segment. A lot of bad press for Amazon in terms of keeping workers safe. And to their credit, they're adapting. A lot of people are adapting here, right, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, Amazon is adapting on the fly as best they possibly can. They're looking into being able to test all their workers. That might mean creating their own tests. They're doing temperature checks. Look, rolling out the ability to do no-touch infrared temperature checks to every warehouse, Whole Foods, that's not a simple procedure given the shortage of some of those items. Amazon is making every effort, and I encourage everyone. Jeff Bezos posted an open letter to shareholders on their day one blog today, and it really details just everything they're doing. And look, some people are going to get exposed. They're going to get sick, and that's terribly unfortunate. And that, John Oliver covered this on Last Week Tonight, that, Amazon originally had a very high bar for, you had to prove you had it and had to be quarantined in order to get 2 weeks of paid leave. They've changed that. And I love Last Week Tonight, but I thought it was kind of unfair. Nobody knew when they wrote that policy that getting a test was going to be impossible. We all assumed that tests were coming, and we still hope they're coming. So there's just, if a company says, hey, workers, deal with it, that's one thing. You can be mad at them. If a company every day is releasing updates on what it's doing and it's taking meaningful steps, trying things like disinfecting clouds at some of its stores, I just can't be angry at that company. And other people, part of the Last Week Tonight segment was like, well, they're also shipping non-essential items. Well, is workout equipment a non-essential item, or is it going to keep you sane and in decent shape through this? I understand prioritizing essential items,
Yep.
but I think everybody's definition, a board game in a lot of places, is essential. And I think it's very short-sighted, people who are judging, what other people buy, and a worker shouldn't have to put himself at risk to send you a yoga mat. Well, the worker's there anyway, and I don't want to be flip about that, but is this the time to order a bunch of stuff you don't need? No, probably not. But are there things we all need because we're stuck at home? I mean, look, I've had to buy about 18 different cables, another light for video, another monitor stand because I'm operating out of an office and my home. We had to buy a desk because we only had one at home. Those were essential things because, look, I recognize I'm not a healthcare worker, but I do believe my job is essential in providing people financial news and keeping them safe economically through this. What you do, essential. Again, not a doctor, not a frontline worker. God bless those people, says the atheist. But that said, let's be a little less judgmental. Let's look at, is Amazon doing its best? And I honestly believe they're trying really hard.
Absolutely. Dan, well said, well put. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, Dan, and stay safe, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the network on Tuesday.
I'll see you Tuesday.
1, 2.
Welcome back. We're going to talk markets now. On the line from Chicago, Illinois is Mr. Oliver Rennick. He is the lead anchor of the TD Ameritrade Network, and he kind of bookends the programming each and every day. And he also was the host of the town hall that we talked about on last week's show. Oliver, great to have you on the program.
Yo.
How you doing?
Thank you, Jeff.
How are you guys doing?
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. And
Get in there, man.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, all good, all good. We're just, hanging out, trying to stay afloat, stay inside. Hopefully, maybe that's going to change soon. That's at least what the market was excited about this week.
Yeah, and I want to jump right in. Watching your programming all week, there've been some ups and downs, but when I look at the market, and we're recording this on a Friday afternoon, it's about 1:15 p.m. Eastern time. Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is kind of like a bellwether. I kind of watch it all the time. I know you look at a lot of different indices, but we're over 24,000. Real good, nice pickup as a result of some of the recent news. What can you tell us about what happened during the week?
Yeah, it's been, for the most part, pretty positive in terms of just the news on the virus front. It continues to be the most important thing for equity markets. Is the easiest explanation for why stocks have found their footing and turned stability into an outright rally. If we close where we are right now on a Friday, that'd be pretty impressive. Stocks have not been able to rally on a Friday in quite some time. Mm-hmm. And if we do, or even if we don't just have a big sell-off, then I think it'll be a key step up from the gains we've already had if we were able to hold into the weekend, because the risk of holding risk assets into the weekend has been surprises and the fast-moving virus, and that nothing really has surprised positively. So if the market has hopes for positive surprises, that's a big change in sentiment that really has only been properly reflected in stocks. So there's a lot of people right now that are framing the stock market rally as having gone AWOL, that the economy is in tatters, and that equity markets are an obvious short after a 28% run. Not the way we've covered it since the market was able to process very bad data in mid-March. Our coverage has been very much on the other end of that, saying that the focus needs to be on the reasons for the equity market rallying as being potentially economically positive, and hinting that the virus as a threat to the economy is running out of surprises and is fading. And indeed, that's been the case as we see over the past 5 days. And really, it looks like stocks are the only asset class that have been able to properly acknowledge that turn of events.
Yeah. One of the items that I was on your network yesterday, and you were before in the previous segment, you were talking about volatility, and I think you were referring to that in your previous statement. We come in on a Monday and we're down 900 points. This volatility. Has volatility gotten better over the course of the week in terms of the VIX, which I think is the measure by which we measure volatility, or you measure volatility? Professionals measure volatility, I should say. I'm sorry.
No, that's 100% right. The VIX has been steadily declining since March 16th. So actually, it's a really good, astute thing to bring up, because the VIX has been the clearest tale about what story is developing since the worst of the market in mid-March, and that has been a bottoming process for equities, a topping process for the viral curves, and the early stages of bad data that are being absorbed by investors with a fair amount of ease. That really is what the VIX has been saying, because even during bad days of the market, which we've had plenty of sell-offs over the last 3.5 weeks, the VIX has continued to decline. Even on bad days, it has been very hard to get VIX higher. So really what this is about in a nutshell is two things, the equity market. One, which is the most important, is that the deep, deep paranoia and fear about how bad this could have gotten and how bad this still could get was reflected in the way the market moved so viciously lower, and how the VIX moved so incredibly fast higher. Mm-hmm. But when you have that setup then where the expectations are for really nothing short of the worst financial crisis in history, that's what markets and that's what policy were telling us. This was going to be the worst financial event in history. And right now it doesn't look to be that way. What it looks to be like is a potential for the worst economic event in history that has been staved off by a huge amount of rescue policy on a federal level, monetary and fiscal in style. So if you net out something closer to neutral from the assistance from the government next to the hit to the economy, then it really makes a ton of sense that stocks would be gaining their feet and investors more willing to take risks. So we don't know what the net result of the policy combined with the economic hit is going to be. But if the virus slows down and we're able to get back open, within the next month, which is what it seems like we're aiming for to start that process, then framed that way, the rally in stocks makes a lot of sense. Now, going forward, it's going to be more difficult because making this relief move when you're down 30% off the highs is a lot easier to do than when you're only 18% off the highs.
Last question, Oliver. Are there segments or sectors that you're surprised by? Obviously, the retail sector taking a hit, but we've seen the technology sector really step up. We talked about Square, Venmo, PayPal, others stepping up to help distribute some of the stimulus. But are there segments of the economy that have really surprised you over the course of the last few weeks as being in terms of their staying power, or maybe they're losing power, or whatever the right word is?
No, that's the second point, actually, about why the market has been able to find its footing, because what we're learning is that a really important part of the global economy is still functioning, and that is everything that happens on a digital scale, whether it's content consumption through companies like Netflix, which have made new highs, ordering online through Amazon or Wayfair or JD.com, or Alibaba, all these things, all these stocks have performed in a way that is representative of the role they're playing in our lives. And to some extent, these trends have only been really accelerated, amplified through our quarantine. So, there is a whole part of this market that is crucial to the way the world is turning towards the future, and that doesn't change because of quarantine. So it's been really fascinating to see. And I was kind of a doubter of some of this originally. People were like, oh, you need to buy Netflix because we're going to be quarantined. It seemed a little bit far-fetched, but no, the power of a narrative and the power of what's happening in news stories is very obvious in markets right now, because not only is it just narrative, but the narrative is becoming reality as people consume these things. And Netflix, retrenches itself compared to its peers, and Amazon is clearly just an absolute behemoth and we're just operating, general, life activities. So it's a huge part of the market, and for good reason, because Amazon has basically been running the world for like a month and a half.
Yeah, and back to your Netflix comment, I've actually found some shows that I grew up with in the 1980s, things like Battlestar Galactica from 1978, not the reimagined. So I've actually been able to revisit some of those things, and it actually reinvigorates me, makes me feel younger. Oliver Rennick, always a pleasure chatting with you. Get your perspective. Have a great rest of the day. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you again very soon.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Jeff.
Welcome back. And now we're going to talk about something a little bit different. We're not going to talk about necessarily personal finance. We're not going to talk about retirement. We're not going to talk about savings per se, but we're going to talk about distance learning. I thought that would be very interesting for many of the parents and students out there. So joining me on the line, she is a English teacher for over 20 years and currently at the Hebrew Academy of the Five Towns and Rockaway here in New Jersey, Mrs. Michelle Beach. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine. And how would you, it's been a while since I've been in school, but should I refer to you instead of Michelle? Should I just call you Mrs. Beach? Like, I'm one of your students?
You absolutely don't have to do that. I just want to clarify, my school is actually in New York.
Oh, my apologies. New York. First, before we kind of get started on some distance learning, kind of the best practices or things that people can take away, how are things going? Obviously, this is a break, an Easter break, a Passover break for students, but how are things going in general for you and the school?
I think we're doing very well. We were lucky in that we really jumped into the technology and distance learning with both feet forward right away. We had kind of the inkling that this was going to be happening, and we had a couple of quick staff development days before the craziness started. So we were really up and running, I guess, a good week or so before the city even started thinking about it.
That's good. And I really want to talk to you about distance learning, because you have been doing that since things have been closed down in New York and New Jersey. Let's start with kind of the basics. How are you doing this? How do you effectuate a lesson plan, create a lesson plan, and then implement it across technology?
It's definitely tricky. It's not a one size fits all problem to solve, because, for instance, my AP students, they've transitioned beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
It's not perfect, but we meet 2 to 3 times a week for 50-minute live sessions, and they are there and they're attentive and they want to do well. And I'm giving them supplemental assignments along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Watch this, respond to it in our group chat, or read this and complete this assignment by this date. And they're self-starters. They're 11th graders. They're doing beautifully with it. My 10th graders, for instance, though, as an alternative, they're not the strongest learners. They're not the most enthusiastic. And they're harder to reach through distance learning. I can't rely on giving one of my signature stares to get a student to stop acting goofy. It doesn't work. So I have to rely on being able to shut his video. One of my very first days trying to do this, I had a student that was actually attempting to make Wacky Mac, a version of mac and cheese, during my lesson.
Oh, no.
And every time he spoke, the video would click to him for students that had it set that way, that the
Mm-hmm.
person speaking is the one you see. And he starts doing a cooking demonstration.
Oh, wow.
So the ability to be able to shut their audio or shut their video as necessary from the teacher's perspective made certain types of tech better than others for this.
And are you using, it sounds like you're using like a Zoom or a Skype-esque web conference tool. Is that, or is there something that is built in-house for the school, particularly for the school?
No, I haven't heard of any schools that actually had something built in-house for this.
Mm-hmm.
We started out, we were instructed that first day of staff development to use Google Meet or Google Hangout.
Okay.
I think they're calling it Google Meet now. And we did, and that had some issues. It's wonderful in some ways, but if a teacher muted or blocked the video of a student, the student could unblock it. And when you're dealing with adolescents,
Sorry. Yeah.
it becomes a little bit of an issue because they don't get the whole, you need to just stop what you're doing there. We switched to Zoom, or many of us switched to Zoom. I think by now almost everybody in my school is.
Mm-hmm.
And we switched to Zoom about a week in. And Zoom allowed us to, if the teacher mutes you, then you can't unmute yourself. If the teacher blocks your video, like, the teacher has the ability to do that. And that gave some power back. That same student, the following week, attempted to try to do the Macarena in the middle of my class. And I was able to just very quickly and without fanfare just click a little button to turn his video off and continue with my discussion. And that definitely gave a lot of the power back.
Yeah.
But it's tough with the weaker learners. It's definitely tough to keep them focused online. It's tough not seeing them 4 or 5 days a week. And that is a challenge. And it's very easy to overwhelm them with work.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to say, oh, well, we're not meeting, so I should give them this to do and that to do. And, oh, we would normally be doing this. You have to dial back because it's not normal. It's not the same. And we don't know their situations. I have a friend who is also a teacher at my school. She has 3 kids at home in elementary school, 2 third graders and a 5th grader, and they're all supposed to be doing live lessons with their teachers at the same time that she's teaching.
Yeah,
It's very difficult.
I was going to say, and before we kind of get into kind of how do you overcome some of these challenges, and you're a parent as well as a teacher, you mentioning some of the students maybe, I don't know, acting out or acting up, and I can understand. I mean, we're bottled up, right? We're in our apartments, we're in our homes, kind of quarantined. You can't do much. But as a parent, how do you do your job? Because many people still are employed, but now they're telecommuting. How do you be a parent, and also how do you make sure that your child is attentive in a new way, in a new learning style for them that may not necessarily be suited to them or different for them? That's got to be very challenging for a lot of these parents out there.
It definitely is. From my perspective, I have a second grader. So the expectations for the second graders are not as high as for even the third graders. Mm-hmm. And in our school district, the public school district, they are not having the second graders FaceTiming or Skyping or any of that stuff with their students. The teachers are just sending assignments and asking the kids to respond either in Google Classroom or in the workbooks that they sent home at the beginning, which means the parents have to kind of figure out how to guide their students and teach them. My daughter had 9 pages of basically intro to geometry type math, which was astounding to me that they're even doing that in second grade. And I had to muddle through it with her last week, and that was just one day of math. So it's a lot on the parents, and especially many parents, as you said, are working parents. Many are teachers trying to do stuff at the same time. It's tricky. It definitely is. I'm lucky that my husband is home here at the same time, so he can be working with her and trying to keep her kind of out of the way when I'm doing my live classes. But even so, there are times when she gets away from him, and all of a sudden she's running up to give me a hug in the middle of my lesson. At one point, I taught most of an AP lesson with a stuffed animal on my shoulder. I just ignored it and kept going.
I think there are a lot of parents and people attending Zoom meetings that have their pets. I know my cats have run across the screen, and I think that's becoming. We've all seen the CNN clip of the child and the mother running in while the I guess the expert was talking on live TV, and I think it's kind of that kind of stuff kind of accepted at this point. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just think that that's probably an accepted practice now. People are bottled up with their families and just expect people to run in.
We even had a full faculty Zoom meeting last week where the associate principal was speaking, and his little toddler came running in, and he's yelling to his wife, "Can you please get her out of here right now?" We realize we're all cooped up in tight spaces, and we're all doing the best we can.
Yeah, and that's very clear. Just to give the audience an understanding, how big generally are your classes, your 11th and 10th graders, in terms of number?
I have about 25 in my typical classes. My AP classes have, I think, 18 and 19.
Sure.
So they're a little bit smaller. But you're dealing with a lot of kids. And that can be definitely challenging when you're not seeing them regularly. We're also, as far as the AP kids, we're offering essay conferencing. And I will say that's actually better than the classroom, because where it's hard for an 11th grader to find 5 minutes to run to their English teacher to have a quick discussion about what they can do to improve their essay, telling them that they can make a quick Zoom meeting with me and it can fit in between those classes. They don't have to go anywhere. It's not a physical, can I get to Mrs. Beach's classroom and then get to math on time? It's, let me quickly click into this meeting with Mrs. Beach. We'll talk for 5 minutes, and then I'll click into math. So,
yeah.
I mean, in that way, there's actually a benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of telecommuting, just to kind of make it a parallel, I mean, there's no commute. So the hour and a half commute that many, especially here in the tri-state area, trying to go from New Jersey or Connecticut into Manhattan, right? That is a long commute. You save that time, and I think that's probably a benefit to people. You can actually be more productive, and you don't have to wait on a train or a bus or whatever. So I can definitely see that being an advantage, and I guess that's a nice thing to take out of this. What about have you had any conversations about grading, right? So, and are there because you're not having the one-on-one connectivity. How do you grade? Do you grade or scale differently how you assess these children?
So I'm certainly being kinder when it comes to due dates and expectations like that, because I've had students, I tried to do a live essay. I mean, there's still an AP exam coming up next month. So I did a live essay with my AP juniors last week. And I had one student send me an email about 3 hours later saying, I'm so sorry. My whole house's Wi-Fi went down. None of us were able to access anything. And therefore, I couldn't do the essay. Can I please do it now? Of course. I had another one who handed in the essay about 30 minutes late. I'm so sorry. I was in the middle of writing it and my parents needed me. And you know what? This is what I was starting to say earlier. We don't know what their family situations are. Sometimes you've got 5 people in a family all on the same Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi crashes. Sometimes mom and dad are working and the older siblings have to help take care of the younger siblings. So we definitely have to be kinder as far as due dates. I'm still being the same tough AP teacher as far as grading their essay work and expecting them to do quality work. I'm definitely a little bit more lenient with my underclassmen in my expectations of them. It's harder. I'm not seeing them every day. I can't give them little bits every day. So I really have to adjust my expectations for them. That said, I'm still giving them assignments. I'm still putting grades on them. My school has decided to combine third and fourth quarter into one grade. We were pretty close to the end of third quarter when all of this hit. And it would have been impossible to ask teachers to put together those end of quarter grades, especially with kids owing, the end of quarter assignments and stuff. It made more sense for us to just make a big combined third and fourth quarter.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And this has nothing to do with distance learning, but I'm wondering, Michelle, Mrs. Beach, these kids that are looking, I know, but I'm just tongue in cheek. I feel like you're a teacher. I should be referring to you as Mrs. Beach. But in terms of visiting colleges, a lot of kids, I remember my junior year, my father took me to visit, mother took me to visit some schools. I'm wondering what the impact potentially, and this is, again, nothing to do with distance learning. I mean, have you all talked about that as a staff? And maybe that's not necessarily something that you directly get involved in, but have you talked about how do you handle college visits and how do you facilitate that? How do you guide children to going to school during what arguably is a difficult time, especially for those seniors?
So we haven't had necessarily a full staff meeting about it, but I know that there are students that are concerned. There are students that are concerned about not being able to actually visit. I guess the summer before senior year is a big time when they do a lot of visits to take a look at colleges. There are huge question marks for that. There are question marks as far as, we have a whole lot of kids that were planning on taking ACTs and SATs this spring, and those were canceled. So they have question marks even about that. The whole college admissions process is really up in the air right now. But even colleges themselves are up in the air. I've heard that many colleges are talking about making this semester pass-fail. And while that's lovely for some students, other students who took classes this semester counting on them raising their GPA, well, that's out the window if that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, you just feel for the parents, you feel for the students, people that are graduating, going off to school with all these unknowns, or even if you're evaluating school. And who knows if, distance learning becomes kind of more the norm for some of these schools. I mean, clearly there are online classes at these colleges and universities, and I know people that are taking classes now that are doing that online. I wonder, just in the last couple minutes that we have, Michelle, do you see a paradigm shift? Like in the business world, I think people are talking like, okay, well, there's really no need now to get on a plane to travel to visit your client unless you physically have to be there. Like if you're in construction business or something where you physically have to be on site. Does the same hold true for education? Or maybe it's eventually splitting a couple days on site in the classroom and the rest virtually. I mean, do you see that potentially happening?
Well, I don't necessarily think that would happen. What I do think is that, like, in New York in the Northeast, we always have a couple of snow days.
Yep.
Not last year or this year for some reason. The weather has been strange, but normally you can count on a couple of snow days a year where, oh, good, we get a free day off to relax and just enjoy being home. I don't see that happening anymore. I think from now on it's going to be, okay, today is a distance learning day, and teachers are going to be expected to log into Zoom classes with their students, and it'll be business as usual.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
I definitely see that. I do think on the collegiate level, a lot of students who wouldn't have thought that distance learning would work for them might now sign up for some online classes when the world becomes normal again.
Yeah, I think it kind of opens the doors to a lot of different ways, depending on your style of learning. Right? I was always the type of person that I needed to be doing, and I needed guidance. I needed one-on-one from a teacher to kind of give me that. And even as a employee, I like to get the one-on-one feedback. I like to make sure I'm headed in the right direction. And so if I can get that through technology, or splitting it between technology and a physical on-site presence, maybe at least 6 feet apart, of course, at least in today's age, that would always seem to work well. Well, Michelle, I got to hand it to you. Credit to the students, credit to all the teachers out there for adjusting and adapting to what are obviously very difficult and trying times. Appreciate you joining us on the program, and we look forward to having you back very soon to talk more about this. I think this is going to be a whole new area for us to talk about.
Thank you so much. I'd love to come back.
Michelle, that was absolutely fabulous. So this will air on Sunday, and let's see what the reception is. And if it goes really well, then we can do something, like a special where we kind of break it down every day for like 10 minutes. Would that work for you?
Definitely. One thing we didn't get to today that I'd love to talk about is kind of having to teach students the etiquette of being on these videos.
I was going to ask you about, put the phone down, turn off the other, the browser tabs when you're looking at like sports and things like that. I wanted to get to that, so I think that's great.
I actually had a student the other day who literally must have rolled over, realized class was starting, and clicked into class in bed, head still on the pillow, rubbing her eyes for everyone to see.
Yeah, that's.
I've had kids come in shirtless.
Oh, really? That's weird.
The boys, at least, not the girls.
And
then the other thing we should definitely talk about moving forward is the security of it.
Yeah.
Making sure that people who don't belong in there aren't coming in.
That's good. Okay, so let's see how this goes, and then maybe we'll do something next week, just for 10 minutes that I can put out every, for the next 5 days or something would be really cool. I appreciate that.
That sounds great.
Michelle,
not a problem.
Thank you so much. Stay safe. Enjoy being at home with your family, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.
Welcome back, and now we're going to talk a little retirement legislation, regulation, and all things in between. And joining me on the line, he's one half of the Legal Eagles, and his name, Kevin Walsh. He's a principal with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, D.C. Kevin, how are you?
I'm doing well, Jeff. Thanks for having me on. It's finally starting to feel like spring down here in D.C., and even though I can't go very far, it's making being in the backyard and gardening a little bit more pleasant.
Yeah, good for you, and hope everyone's staying safe, and you and your colleagues and at Groom Law are staying safe. So lots going on. Obviously, the CARES Act, we had that whole special event last week. We talked with you and David about the CARES Act. People can certainly check that out online. And one of the things that was part of the CARES Act was there's some SBA loans, there's the Paycheck Protection Program. Some new news, though, about that, though, Kevin.
Yeah, it's a good thing we did that episode last week as opposed to this week, so we could get the word out to listeners while there was still money in the program. So the big thing with the Paycheck Protection Program, is that it's run out of money. So Congress allocated $349 billion, which sounds like a whole lot of money, in money that they could lend to small businesses, 500 or fewer employees, largely forgivable loans. And 3 weeks after enactment of the legislation, the SBA has already signed off on loans for all $349 billion.
Wow.
So that leaves the program kind of on hold now, unless and until Congress allocates more money. And there's been some talk that Congress is going to allocate more money. Both Democrats and Republicans have said they want to add another $250 billion, quarter of a trillion with a T, dollars to the program. But they can't agree on, if they want to attach more strings or if it needs to be paired with other money for other programs.
Wow. Well, obviously the program has been successfully, or at least positively received because people are submitting money. How does this fit in, Kevin, with, and this is just prognostication, I guess, on your part of thinking about it, but how does this fit in with the stimulus number 4, right? I think we were talking about that in our special event last week. I mean, shouldn't this just be a continuation of, meaning voting, like a resolution or something, where they say, okay, here's some more money, let's go? Why does it have to come with strings, I guess?
Well, I think you got to ask the two parties about what they're trying to do with it.
Yeah.
While they're working together on saving the economy, I don't want to be too hard on one side or the other side, because I hope that they are both. I hope that both sides are negotiating in good faith to keep the economy in as good condition as it can possibly be in as we deal with this pandemic.
Yeah.
But you ask a great question. If this needs to wait for COVID 4 or whatever we call the next CARES Act 2, whatever we call that next major piece of legislation, then we could have a couple of weeks where there isn't this kind of paycheck protection loan program. Mm-hmm. And this program was really designed, or is really designed, to allow employers to keep employees on for 8 weeks with the government bearing the payroll costs. So if there are small businesses out there that were in the process of getting their loan application together, or that were going to rely on this program as a way of keeping people from losing their jobs, then a gap of a couple of weeks, it's very harmful, because if you can't bridge that time period, people are going to lose their jobs. So I think it's disappointing that it doesn't seem like they're getting it done, but hope springs eternal. Maybe next week, now that they've run out of money, there'll be a greater impetus for acting.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. And my apologies, I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying, by asking the question, I wasn't trying to pit you on one side or the other. So my apologies there.
No, I didn't think you are, but I need to be careful about what I say, because I think both parties are trying to do the right thing for the most part. And I'm in DC, and I work with people on both sides of the aisle, and
absolutely,
and it's important that people recognize that it's not necessarily an us versus them thing. It's just kind of competing visions for the most effective way to do good.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's move on. I think a new rule. We had talked about electronic delivery on the show. We've been talking about that for a while. I know this is probably, I don't know, second or third in your list of like the most hot topics. And maybe, I know you love missing participants, and we also talk cybersecurity, but this is an important topic to you and the team as well.
Well, and it's more important, with the coronavirus, because paper delivery wasn't that effective before now, in my view. But paper delivery now, where, I don't know about you, but when mail comes to the door, we're Lysol wiping it off before we open it. We're not super excited about kind of new things coming into our house at this point. Electronic delivery is a way that you can communicate without the risk of spreading COVID-19. It's like the shift to Zoom from in person, or the shift to Skype from in person. Mm-hmm. And the big update here, and there's nothing substantive on it, is that that rule that we talked about last fall, where DOL had a proposal to make the default electronic delivery of documents as opposed to mail delivery of documents.
Yes.
Well, they have sent a final version of that rule kind of to the White House for final sign-off. So it goes to the Office of Management and Budget for final review before it gets published. And this is a significant step, because usually when rules get sent to OMB, sometime in the next 2 to really 45 days, and I can't guess which it'll be at this point, but it could be 2 days, it could be 45 days, it could be somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
The final rule tends to get published. So it looks like, one of the big questions people had is, can DOL walk and chew bubblegum at the same time? Can they keep advancing the administration's non-COVID related priorities while simultaneously dealing with all the kind of emergency issues that come up with COVID-19? And here, it looks like DOL has been able to do that by sending this final rule, which is probably going to be pretty significant, over to OMB. So that's going to be a topic in the next couple of weeks for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is. I think people can do both. I mean, I think they're trying to think longer term, right? We have to think post-pandemic, and it is important for the immediate here and now to make sure people are taken care of. But, I mean, I think this is a good sign. I like the fact that we're not taking our eye off the ball in terms of the CARES Act and stimulus and today's needs, but we're also thinking about, because at some point we'll get back to some level of normalcy, and we're thinking about new retirement legislation and getting people saving and restoring, retirement plans to full operation, right? I mean, that's what I take away from this signal.
Yeah, I mean, I think post-pandemic, there is going to be a need to, one, it's a good thing that during the pandemic, people are still thinking about the future. But after the pandemic, I think Congress is probably going to have to take more looks or take another look at the retirement system. It's been great that the retirement system has been able to provide liquidity for people in need by hardship distributions or hardship loans for kind of the COVID emergency. But, every dollar that comes out now is a dollar less for people to have in retirement. So hopefully, once we get the medical crisis behind us, we can pivot to the economic crisis and getting people back on their feet.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. And maybe it's not a year, sets them back a year, because if you add in compounding, right, compound interest, and I mean, that we know from the 2008 financial crisis that when balances went down for some people, they had to delay retirement. So a lot of work to be done. But Kevin, I'm going to we'll end the segment here. I really appreciate you and your colleague David always sharing great insights on what's going on the Hill, kind of the inside baseball look. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you very soon.
All right. Thanks for having us on, Jeff, and stay safe, you and all your listeners. Bye.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the BRN Sunday podcast. I want to thank Michelle Beach from the Hebrew Academy of the Five Towns in Rockaways for stopping by and teaching us about distance learning. I feel like I'm going back to school, and I'm there already. If only I could turn back Father Time. And I want to thank you, of course, our audience, for making time out of your busy schedules to join us. And thank you, of course, to our regular contributors. They are an amazing bunch. And, of course, they donate their time. Don't forget, we're back again tomorrow morning with BRN AM. We're going to be talking about the impact on what's happening in the United States and around the globe on the financial advisory business. You're not going to want to miss that. So until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.